Hello, Wildcats. As promised, I'm back with a weekly sneak peek of a book that is new or will be new to the Sylvester Library. This week's book, well, technically last week's book, is a nonfiction title, Caught, Nabbing History's Most Wanted, written by Georgia Bragg and illustrated by Kevin O'Malley. And it contains a bunch of true stories about some historical figures who were criminals or troublemakers or just accidental troublemakers, and what they did and how they were found out and how they were eventually caught or stopped. Now, I chose this book last week, but I never got around to recording anything. And part of the reason was because I was struggling to choose which person I wanted to read about. Um, I couldn't decide if I wanted to read about Typhoid Mary because we are living through a little pandemic right now, or Rasputin because the Electric Duck Book Club read the book The Family Romanoff earlier in the year, and Rasputin ended up being one of the more interesting and weird aspects of that book. So, since I didn't get a sneak peek out last week, I decided I will read about both of them. But I will read about Typhoid Mary today, and by the end of the week, I will read the chapter about Old Crazy Eyes Rasputin. So if you like true stories, especially if they're a little weird, then you may enjoy these short chapters from this book, and you might want to see if you can check the book out either through KCLS or when we get back to school from the Sylvester Library. So here are two pictures of Mary Mallon, also known as Typhoid Mary. This is an illustration from the book, and this is a picture of the actual woman, and they kind of get the big hair shockingly right. But let's learn a little bit more about her story. So now, Typhoid Mary, charmingly subtitled, Don't Eat Where You Poop. Mary Mallon went about her life denying the obvious. She made people sick. It didn't have to happen, but Mary didn't wash after going to the bathroom. People usually keep that dirty little secret to themselves. Except with secrets, you have to cover your tracks, and Mary always left a clue. She was a cook, and no matter what recipe Mary followed, there was one ingredient no one wanted, but they got anyway: Mary's cooties. And they had a killer ingredient: typhoid. She didn't exactly mean to poison the food with a deadly disease. Not at first, anyway. But the poop was in the pudding. At 15 years old, Mary Mallon sailed to America to increase her chances of survival. She left Ireland, a country that lived on potatoes until they were all destroyed by a disease called blight. Not once, but twice. 1 million people had died from starvation, and another 3 million were barely hanging on. Mary witnessed a lot of hardship. The New World had food. Mary, along with 1.5 million other Irish people, went to get some. Immigrants had it hard, and they got the job done. So Mary got tough. With her drive to never go hungry, Mary became a professional cook. Her work was sloppy and her attitude brusque, but her food was tasty enough for her to be hired as a private chef for wealthy families. She ate her vegetables and grew into a self-sufficient, well-fed immigrant success story. Others around her, though, seemed to be jinxed. Practically everywhere she worked, people got deathly ill. Of the last 8 families Mary cooked for, 7 families got typhoid. Mary must have noticed a trend, but she just packed up and moved on. It happened again at each new job. She watched as the once healthy got fevers high enough to fry an egg on their forehead, ice pick between the eyes headaches, and a bellyache that killed all desire for food. As a matter of fact, it killed everybody's appetite. So, over and over again, with fewer people to cook for, Mary kept moving to keep cooking. Typhoid is spread hand to mouth. Basically, the poop germs of an infected person are swallowed. Ew. In 1907, more than 600 people in New York had done just that and died from it, and Mary had cooked for a few of them. There was no hand sanitizer or moist towelettes, and a lot of people didn't even have a sink. But Mary had no excuse because wherever she worked, there was plumbing. In fact, I wanted to blow up the picture of the plumbing and the poor little dude who obviously needs to use it just because plumbing plays a big role. But not everyone had running water. Cities were one big health hazard, overrun with diseases, rodents, and rotting garbage. It was time to clean them up. Conditions were slowly being improved by the work of people like Dr. George Soper. Soper, that's pretty fitting. He was an epidemiologist or a germ finder, and he figured out the origin of typhoid outbreaks like a game of Clue. At one of Mary's jobs, 6 of 11 people she was cooking for got sick, and Dr. Soper followed the long and winding fecal trail right to Mary. No one had blamed Mary before. She wasn't sick, so it couldn't have been her. But Dr. Soper wasn't so sure. As she always did after an outbreak, Mary had taken off, but no one knew where she'd gone until there was another outbreak on Park Avenue in the home of the Bowen family, and the young daughter died. Dr. Soper showed up in person to solve the puzzle. It was Mary Mallon cooking in the kitchen with icky bathroom germs on her hands. She killed the girl, and to prove it, Dr. Soper asked Mary to poop and pee in a cup so he could take it to the lab and test it for typhoid. Excuse me? Mary expressed her shock and distaste for that idea at the top of her lungs. He had no right to come to her workplace and accuse her of killing someone. He'd get her fired, make her unhireable, and who knows what else. She aimed a carving fork at Dr. Soper. If he didn't get lost, she'd kill him. Dr. Soper ran away at fork point. People had died around Mary her whole life. What's the big deal now? Besides, she was strong and healthy. That's why she didn't get sick. Couldn't he see that? Dr. Soper only saw a threat. Afraid of being gutted, Soper secretly followed Mary home. He returned later with another doctor for backup. They ambushed Mary at home and asked her again for her oh so personal samples. Mary vehemently was oh so not doing that. Both doctors ran for their lives. Dr. Soper passed the job on to Dr. Sarah Josephine Baker. Maybe Mary would be more willing to give her bodily fluids to a woman doctor, a rarity in those days. After Mary slammed the door in Dr. Baker's face, Baker returned with 5 policemen. But Mary climbed out the window, ran across the yard, scaled a fence, and then got an accomplice to stack trash cans outside an outhouse, an outdoor bathroom, while Mary hid inside for 3 hours. Talk about germs. No one could find her until someone noticed Mary's clothing stuck in the door. It took all 5 policemen to get Mary into the horse-drawn ambulance. Dr. Baker sat on Mary the whole way to the hospital. Dr. Soper finally got the bodily fluids he wanted, and the proof he needed. He told Mary the inconvenient truth. She was the first healthy typhoid carrier to be found in the United States. I will write a book about your case. They would both become famous. He would be the smart doctor, and Mary could be the woman with filthy habits. I'm sure she loved that. No, Mary didn't want a book deal. And no, she didn't believe the lab tests. She had worked hard, followed all the rules, and found a way to fit in with the richest families. She had survived. If she was so sick, why did it take 5 policemen to subdue her? The two of them didn't agree about a single fact. Mary wasn't one to sit still and listen to Soper making up lies about how she had infected people. Mary went into the bathroom again and slammed the door. Because Mary was as stubborn as a goat, they wouldn't let her go home. She was moved to North Brother Island, a 20-acre whittled piece of earth in the middle of New York Harbor. That would show her. The only thing there was a hospital for sick people nobody wanted around. It was a health prison. Mary was placed in a bungalow all alone. She wasn't popular, and people talked behind her back. She got the nickname Typhoid Mary. People kept their distance, except for the doctors incessantly stopping by to collect her bowel movements. Ew. They also offered up different cures, but Mary wasn't interested. This went on for more than 2 years. Mary's forced confinement was written about in the newspapers, and concerned readers donated money to help her. Mary got a lawyer and went to court, but she still wasn't allowed to go home. Finally, 3 years after being ripped away from her life, Mary was permitted to leave. There were now 50 documented healthy carriers identified in New York State. So people who are asymptomatic but carried the disease, we hear about that now. And Mary was the only one who was locked up. It wasn't fair. To be released, Mary agreed to wash better, never prepare food for other people, show up for routine tests, and inform the health department of her address. Mary said yes to all this, but she really meant no. Mary disappeared and was back on the lam. Before the internet, security cameras, and monitoring ankle bracelets, there was no way to find her or to know if her cooties were going to be back on someone's dinner plate. 5 years later, at the Sloan Hospital for Women, a maternity hospital, 25 people got typhoid and 2 died. Those people had all eaten food from the dining hall, think school cafeteria. Everyone there had teased the cook, Mrs. Brown, by calling her Typhoid Mary. It was a sick joke. Ha ha! Ew! It was Typhoid Mary. Mary Mallon had used the fake name Mrs. Brown to keep cooking. Interesting name choice for a person who wasn't washing her hands after going number 2. Was it a twisted joke or a secret warning for those in the know? Whatever her thinking, denying the existence of germs, cooking for people when she shouldn't, and endangering pregnant women and babies, it couldn't get worse. She blew it. She was dirty and guilty. She was a human murder weapon, and she didn't care. The authorities chased Mary again. They followed her to a friend's house. Sergeant Keneally rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Keneally climbed a ladder to the second-floor window, but was scared off by a barking bulldog. His next time up the ladder, he brought a hunk of meat to distract the dog, and then he found Mary hiding in, guess what? The bathroom again. She was crouched down on the floor tile when he finally got the door open. She spent the next 23 years back on North Brother Island. Near the end, she had so much junk piled in her cottage it was impossible to move around. Being a hoarder was another one of Mary's little secrets. After a paralyzing stroke, she spent the next 6 years of her life in bed. It was impossible to wash herself, even if she wanted to. Kitchen closed. So that's the little chapter on Typhoid Mary, and there are some facts and stats at the end that are pretty interesting. And there's also a little section on catchy epidemics that have things like cholera and smallpox, and who knows, maybe one day COVID-19 will be up there too. So by the end of the week, I will have another chapter from this book. Again, there's poor Mary, probably when she was bedridden. Um, and this is a little political cartoon that came out around the time. But at the end of the week, we'll read the chapter on Rasputin, and I hope everybody has a great week. Bye.